Racist flight attendant refuses to serve black woman, then learns she's a top airline shareholder. You won't believe what went down on this seemingly ordinary flight from JFK to Los Angeles. A routine journey took a jaw-dropping turn when a flight attendant singled out one black passenger with shocking prejudice. Little did this attendant know that the very woman she refused to serve, shamed right there in front of other passengers, happened to be one of the top shareholders of the airline. By the time the truth came out, it was too late to undo the damage. Prepare for a roller coaster ride of humiliation, redemption, and a karmic twist that will leave you speechless and cheering for ultimate justice. Alyssa Howard shifted in her seat in the waiting area of John F. Kennedy International Airport, Terminal 4. It was an early morning in late fall, and though the hustle and bustle of holiday travelers had yet to fully bloom, the terminal was already alive with people from all over the world. Children clung to their parents, some travelers were busily catching up on emails before boarding, and the overhead speakers announced updates for departing flights. Alyssa was wearing a tailored navy blue pantsuit, carrying a black leather tote and sporting a sleek pair of flats. She looked like any other business traveler who had a meeting to rush to on the West Coast. She smoothed a hand over her hair, took a brief glance at her watch, and mentally confirmed she had about 30 minutes before her Delta Airlines flight to Los Angeles began boarding. Anyone watching her would think she was just another corporate passenger, prepping for the day ahead, unassuming, calm, with the aura of someone who'd been through 1,000 airports. But there was more to Alyssa than met the eye. At 36, she had climbed to the top of the corporate ladder by forming her own investment firm. She had made a name for herself by picking winning stocks and championing diversity in businesses she supported. Having grown up in a family that faced more than its fair share of biases and financial hardships, Alyssa was determined to make an impact on how minority communities were treated, particularly in large corporations. Her influence extended significantly further than most would guess, particularly in the airline industry. A few years prior, an airline stock had plummeted due to a public relations scandal unrelated to racial issues, but enough to crush investor confidence. Alyssa stepped in, assessed the potential, and bought a substantial chunk of shares when the cost was rock bottom. Over the years, she quietly accumulated even more shares until, shockingly, she became one of the top shareholders of that very airline. And today, she was catching a cross-country flight on that same airline under the radar. One of Alyssa's close friends, Miranda, liked to joke that if Alyssa walked through a Delta office, she should be carried on a gilded chair for all her influence. But Alyssa was never one to flash her status or talk about how her portfolio could shake up an entire board of directors if she wanted. She believed in staying humble or riding coach without the fuss, as she put it. As she sat there, scrolling through her phone, she noticed an older woman in a wheelchair nearby who was trying to flag down an airline staffer for assistance. No one seemed to notice. Alyssa stood, walked over, and offered her help. She introduced herself and guided the elderly woman to the check-in counter, making sure she was all set for her flight. The woman's grateful smile made Alyssa's morning. Moments later, Alyssa returned to her gate, feeling that small measure of satisfaction that came with doing a good deed. That's when they announced the start of pre-boarding for Flight 981 to Los Angeles. Alyssa tucked her phone into her tote and joined the line of business class and priority passengers. She eyed the large Boeing 767 parked outside the window. The red and blue tail flashed the familiar Delta insignia. To a casual onlooker, it was just a plane. To Alyssa, it represented part of her life's work and a slice of a billion-dollar empire. If only she had known that in just a few hours, she would be humiliated by the very airline she helped uplift. And if only the flight attendant responsible could have guessed who Alyssa really was, she might have saved herself a world of trouble. Once on board, Alyssa made her way to her seat in the front cabin. She had used mileage points to upgrade to a lie-flat seat, imagining she might catch a quick nap on the 6-hour journey. The seat was comfortable, the overhead bin space ample, just how she liked it. She carefully placed her tote in the overhead compartment, keeping her laptop within easy reach. As the passengers around her settled in, she noticed a tall, blonde flight attendant weaving through the cabin, checking seatbelts and overhead bins. The flight attendant's name tag read Linda. She appeared efficient, if a little stern. Linda had one of those perpetually puckered expressions, as though she disapproved of everything she saw. But Alyssa knew that flight attendants were on their feet long hours, so she passed no immediate judgment on Linda's reserved demeanor. A few rows ahead, a father was helping his young daughter settle in. Across the aisle, a middle-aged couple rummaged through their carry-ons, apparently searching for medication or something essential. The ambient chatter was typical for a flight of this size, everyone quietly stowing items and responding to gentle instructions from the attendants. Before pushback, Linda made an announcement about the safety protocols. There was something clipped in Linda's tone that Alyssa noticed, but she shrugged it off. Some people just had no-nonsense personalities, especially while they were in work mode. Linda concluded the announcement with an instruction to turn off electronic devices during takeoff. The engines began to rev and the plane taxied onto the runway. As the aircraft lifted off and soared above the city, Alyssa caught a glimpse of the sunrise over Manhattan's skyline. It reminded her of how far she'd come in life and how far she still wanted to go. She was heading to Los Angeles for a board meeting that could influence significant philanthropic investments. She tried to steady her mind, focusing on what she needed to accomplish. When the seatbelt sign dinged off about 20 minutes later, Linda and another flight attendant began the beverage service in the front cabin. Alyssa was looking forward to a cup of hot tea, something to soothe her nerves and hopefully allow her to rest. However, as Linda approached, Alyssa noticed a subtle shift in her body language. She served the middle-aged white couple across the aisle first, cheerfully offering them drinks and complimentary snacks. She even cracked a small joke about turbulence. Then Linda moved on to the row behind Alyssa, where a young white woman was traveling with an infant, cooing over the baby for a moment before taking the mother's drink order. Alyssa waited politely, expecting Linda to circle back to her, but Linda walked straight past Alyssa, pushing the cart forward without even making eye contact. Alyssa assumed it was a simple mistake. After all, it was easy to get distracted or to follow a certain order that wasn't obvious to the passengers. She was patient. She waited. But when Linda returned from the second pass to serve the father and child she'd seen earlier, she still skipped Alyssa's row entirely. Now, this was odd. Alyssa, never wanting to assume the worst, decided to speak up. Gently, she raised her hand to catch Linda's attention. "Excuse me," Alyssa said politely. "Could I possibly get some tea? Or water, if that's easier right now?" Linda paused, as though offended by the mere question. She glanced at Alyssa, eyeing her outfit and face, then her expression flattened into an unfriendly stare. "I'll be with you when I can," Linda answered curtly, and moved on without another word. Alyssa's brow creased. Flight attendants could be stressed or in a hurry, sure, but this seemed unnecessarily dismissive. Yet she tried to brush off the bad feeling. Perhaps Linda was just in a rush or having a bad day. Alyssa resolved not to make assumptions. She put in her noise-cancelling earbuds and tried to watch a short documentary on her tablet. When the beverage service ended, Alyssa still had not been offered anything. Her seat's tray table remained empty. She noticed the father in front of her had a soda, the couple across the aisle had wine, and even the single traveler behind her had a cocktail. She couldn't help the prick of annoyance creeping up inside her. She thought about pressing the call button, but decided to wait for the next service. She didn't like drawing attention or making a scene. Little did she know, Linda was just getting started. Approximately an hour into the flight, the attendants came around with the meal service. Linda and her colleague, an amiable gentleman named Robert, brought out the meal carts. Robert was attending the left side of the aisle, Linda the right. Alyssa's seat was on Linda's side. Robert's service was a stark contrast. He was smiling and politely asking if passengers had any dietary needs, going through the standard routine. Linda, on the other hand, kept glancing toward Alyssa's row with what could only be described as disdain. She served the passenger at the window seat, across from Alyssa with a forced politeness, then came to the father and daughter duo, who were also on the opposite side of the aisle. Now it was Alyssa's turn. The cart was adjacent to Alyssa's row, but Linda's eyes slid right over her as though she didn't exist. Alyssa cleared her throat gently. "I would appreciate a meal, please," she said, her tone level. Linda exhaled sharply, finally looking at Alyssa. "What seat are you in?" she asked, as though it wasn't obvious. Alyssa gestured to the seat she was quite literally occupying. "I'm in 4D, she replied, perplexed by the question. Linda scanned her list in an exaggerated manner, her eyebrows raised. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" she asked pointedly, her voice dripping with condescension. Alyssa felt her cheeks grow warm. "Yes," she answered calmly. "I checked my boarding pass when I sat down. This is the seat I was assigned." Linda didn't even check the manifest thoroughly. She shrugged. "I don't see your name here," she claimed dismissively. Alyssa glanced around, aware of other passengers watching. She didn't want a scene, but this was becoming humiliating. "My name is Alyssa Howard. I'm definitely booked in business class on this flight," she said with composure. Without apology, Linda sniffed and moved to the next row. "I'll be back," she said curtly, leaving Alyssa meal-less once again. By now, the father in front of Alyssa, hearing the exchange, turned around and gave Alyssa a sympathetic look. "You sure you got the right seat, ma'am?" the man asked kindly, as if trying to help. Alyssa showed him her boarding pass on her phone. It clearly stated 4D. He nodded. "She's definitely got the seat," he said quietly. "It's weird how that attendant just ignored you like that." Alyssa whispered her thanks and sank back into her seat. She felt anger bubbling up, but she also felt a wave of sadness and frustration. She had encountered subtle racism in her life, patrons being rude at restaurants, sales clerks trailing her around stores for no reason, colleagues underestimating her in boardrooms. But a flight attendant, in front of a whole cabin of onlookers, blatantly refusing to serve her. Part of her wanted to stand up and demand an explanation. Another part of her wanted to keep quiet and see how far Linda would take this. Perhaps, Alyssa reasoned, it was a big misunderstanding. But the tension in her stomach told her otherwise. Around her, the cabin buzzed with a growing sense of awkwardness. Passengers were beginning to notice the dynamic. Alyssa overheard a woman behind her whisper to her seatmate, "Did you see how that flight attendant talked to her? That was so rude." But no one directly confronted Linda, at least not yet. Roughly half an hour later, Linda returned, accompanied by Robert. It seemed Robert must have sensed the tension, or Alyssa's repeated lack of service had become obvious, because he leaned in to check on Alyssa with a polite smile. "Ma'am, I'm Robert," he began gently. "Is everything okay? I noticed you didn't have a drink or meal yet." Alyssa forced a polite smile. "I'm all right, but I would appreciate some water and a meal if possible." "Of course," Robert said immediately. "We still have the chicken or the pasta option available. Which would you prefer?" Before Alyssa could answer, Linda spoke up in a clipped tone. "We need to confirm her seat. She might be in the wrong cabin." Robert frowned, flipping through the passenger manifest. "No, that can't be. Let me check. What's your name, ma'am?" "Alyssa Howard," she repeated. Within a moment, Robert found her name on the list. "She's right here, Linda. Seat 4D. She's booked correctly." Linda's cheeks flushed, but her eyes hardened, doubling down. "Well, I didn't see it earlier," she said, sounding annoyed that she was being corrected. She turned to Robert, ignoring Alyssa. "If you want to serve her, that's on you, but I'm sticking to the manifest. I didn't see her name." Robert looked perplexed. "Linda, I have it right here. Did you skip a page, maybe?" Linda huffed, then muttered something inaudible, refusing to acknowledge her mistake. Robert turned his attention back to Alyssa and politely offered the meal choices. Alyssa chose the chicken entree, grateful for Robert's courtesy. He promptly handed her a meal tray and offered her a beverage water, to which he added a small slice of lemon. "You let me know if you need anything else," Robert said, his voice warm with sincerity. Alyssa thanked him, though the moment was tainted by Linda's overt hostility. Alyssa caught Linda's glare, directed squarely at her, as if to say, "I'm watching you." A chill ran down Alyssa's spine. She was definitely not imagining anything. Linda's behavior was blatant and personal. As Alyssa nibbled on her meal, she made a conscious effort to steady herself. She had been in far more challenging scenarios, multi-million-dollar negotiations, for instance. Part of her was tempted to mention that she was a top shareholder in Delta Airlines, effectively Linda's ultimate boss in a sense. But Alyssa hated flexing her power just to get basic respect. She placed the half-eaten meal aside, her appetite effectively ruined by the tension. For the next hour, Alyssa tried to work on her laptop, drafting emails regarding the philanthropic project she was spearheading in Los Angeles. But she couldn't fully concentrate. Each time Linda walked down the aisle, Alyssa could feel a storm brewing. She didn't want to believe Linda was targeting her because she was black, yet every sign pointed to exactly that. Flashback. Alyssa couldn't help but recall a painful incident from her past. She had been 15, traveling on a school trip with her predominantly white classmates. The teacher assigned seats in the front rows, but one of the flight attendants insisted Alyssa move to the back of the plane to balance the load, singling her out despite plenty of other seats being vacant. Alyssa complied. What else could she do at that age? She remembered the shame and confusion she felt, wondering why she was the only one asked to move. She was no longer that silent teenager. She was a grown woman, accomplished, wealthy in her own right. But in moments like this, old wounds had a way of reopening, no matter how successful you'd become. By the time the cabin lights dimmed for the quiet flight period, some passengers had reclined their seats to rest. Others watched movies or scrolled through social media. Alyssa tried to get some shoot-eye, but her anxiety wouldn't let her relax. Eventually, nature called. She removed her blanket and quietly made her way to the forward lavatory. Linda stood chatting with Robert near the galley. As Alyssa approached, Linda tensed noticeably. Robert, on the other hand, gave her a small smile of acknowledgement. "I'm just using the restroom," Alyssa said politely, not wanting to intrude on their conversation. Linda rolled her eyes. "This lavatory is for business class and crew," she said coldly. "Coach passengers have to use the facilities at the back." Robert opened his mouth to correct Linda, but Alyssa decided to speak for herself first. "I am a business class passenger," she stated, trying to keep her voice even though she felt an eruption of anger rising inside her. "I'll check your boarding pass again, because I'm sick of the confusion," Linda snapped. "In fact, I'll do it right now." Robert stepped forward, obviously uncomfortable. "Linda," he said carefully, "we already verified Miss Howard's seat. She's in 4D. "It's fine, Robert," Alyssa said, pulling out her phone to show the digital boarding pass again. She was done with the passive aggression. She wanted to end this once and for all. "Here it is," she said, holding out the phone. Linda barely glanced at the screen before shaking her head, as though even the evidence didn't matter to her. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath. "These people need to stay where they belong." Alyssa's heart sank. There it was, out in the open. The racist undertone wasn't even subtle anymore. She wanted to fling back a retort, to demand Linda treat her with the same dignity as every other passenger, but a knot formed in her throat. She felt a cascade of emotions, sadness, anger, and a burning sense of injustice. Robert placed a soothing hand on Alyssa's shoulder. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. Please use the lavatory. There's no issue here." Alyssa nodded her thanks, stepping into the restroom. She locked the door behind her and stared into the tiny mirror. Her reflection was that of a capable, composed adult, a black woman who had fought hard to be where she was. And now she was being discriminated against all over again, in front of others, by someone who was supposed to ensure all passengers were treated with courtesy and respect. When she emerged, Linda was gone, and Robert was preparing coffee in the galley. He gave Alyssa another apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about Linda," he said in a low voice. She's having a rough day." Alyssa decided not to press him. "Thank you for your kindness," she said, softly, then returned to her seat. She stared out the window at the ocean of clouds below, each layer illuminated by faint sunlight. She reminded herself that there was only a few more hours until they landed in Los Angeles. She could handle it. She'd handled worse, but she had no idea how much worse it was going to get before the flight ended. Just when Alyssa thought she could endure the rest of the flight in uneasy silence, Linda initiated the final service, passing through the cabin to offer snacks and beverages before the plane began its descent. Robert started at the front row, Linda started at the back row, and they planned to meet in the middle. Alyssa, in seat 4D, was somewhat in the middle portion of the front cabin. Alyssa watched as Linda moved closer. She could feel other passengers' eyes flicking back and forth, sensing the tension. Some were plainly curious. Others were quietly disgusted by Linda's conduct. Finally, Linda stopped at Alyssa's row, carrying a tray of snack boxes. Without meeting Alyssa's gaze, Linda offered a snack box to the passenger next to Alyssa, a soft-spoken elderly man, then turned away. Determined not to be overlooked this time, Alyssa spoke up. "Could I get one of those snack boxes, please?" Linda turned around with an exaggerated sigh. "We're out," she lied, even though Alyssa could see multiple boxes remaining on the tray. "Wait," the elderly man next to Alyssa said, pointing to the tray. "There are a few left right there." Linda glared at the man, then at Alyssa. "Sorry, they're reserved for paying passengers," she shot back, her tone venomous. Alyssa felt her chest tighten, the humiliation turning into a slow burn of fury. "I am a paying passenger," she reminded Linda, "and I'm in the business cabin. I'd appreciate it if you'd treat me like everyone else." That was all it took. Linda slammed the tray down on the drink cart, causing a few snack boxes to tumble. Several passengers gasped. She fixed Alyssa with a stare that could cut steel. "You people always think you can waltz in and demand special treatment," Linda hissed. "Well, guess what? This seat and service weren't meant for you. If it were up to me, you'd be off this plane." Stunned silence blanketed the cabin. Alyssa's ears pounded, her heart raced. She looked around, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, but her dignity wouldn't allow her to cry in front of these people. Robert stood at the far end of the aisle, jaw slack. The father in the row ahead slowly turned, his face a portrait of disbelief. Then came the wave of protest from a few bold passengers. "What did you just say to her? Are you serious? That's unacceptable." Linda, realizing she had crossed the line, tried to backtrack. She was badgering me for more items," Linda lied, as though Alyssa had been demanding freebies. "And she's not even on the list. She's some kind of stowaway." At that, Alyssa found her voice. "I paid for this seat," she said in a tremulous but firm tone. "I was verified by the manifest. And even if I hadn't, no one deserves to be spoken to like that." Robert rushed forward, stepping between Linda and Alyssa. "Linda, that's enough," he said, clearly appalled. "Monsieur A.M., I'm so sorry. Let me handle this." He reached for his intercom to call the purser or the captain, presumably to report the situation. But Linda wasn't done. Fueled by some twisted sense of righteousness, she grabbed the intercom from Robert's hand. "Captain, we have a disruptive passenger in 4D, Linda lied into the microphone, as though Alyssa had been the one causing trouble. "I think we may need to land and have her escorted off." Several passengers literally gasped, and a woman exclaimed, "This is insane!" Alyssa's anger finally broke free. "You're the disruptive one," she stated, her voice calm but resolute. "I've asked for nothing but basic courtesy. You're targeting me, and everyone here can see it." Linda turned to the nearest passenger for support, but only found shocked faces. She tried to speak again into the intercom, but Robert wrestled it away from her grasp. "Stop, Linda," he demanded. "Stop right now." In the cockpit, the captain and first officer must have been receiving conflicting reports, because the plane began a slight descent and a flight deck announcement boomed, "Flight attendants remain seated. Flight deck will contact you directly." Before Linda could further escalate, the purser, the lead flight attendant, came rushing down the aisle from the front galley. She had presumably heard Linda's frantic call. A petite woman with dark hair in a neat bun, the purser had the name tag Carmen. Her expression was grave. "What is going on here?" Carmen asked, eyeing Linda, Robert, and Alyssa. "Linda, why did you call the flight deck about a disruptive passenger?" Linda pointed at Alyssa. "She's not even supposed to be here. She's refusing to follow directions. She was verbally aggressive toward me." Carmen held up her hand to silence Linda, then looked at Robert. "Please tell me what happened, quickly." Robert, speaking in hushed but urgent tones, relayed the truth. Linda had been skipping Alyssa during service, making racial remarks and publicly humiliating her. Carmen's face darkened with each word, and she turned to Linda with evident disbelief. "Linda," Carmen said, her tone tinged with a quiet fury, "I will handle this." She motioned for Linda to step aside, then turned to Alyssa. "Ma'am, my sincerest apologies. We will deal with this matter immediately. Please, for now, remain calm and seated, and let me speak to the captain to ensure no unnecessary action is taken." Alyssa nodded, relief flooding her that someone with authority seemed to be stepping in. She sank back into her seat, her mind spinning. She still couldn't believe she'd just been called "you people" and threatened in front of a cabin full of witnesses. Carmen stepped away to the galley phone, presumably to contact the cockpit. Linda stood at the edge of the aisle, arms folded, glaring daggers at Alyssa, but Carmen soon ordered Linda to remain in the galley. It was a horrific, surreal moment for Alyssa, but it was about to take an even more dramatic turn, one that would lay bare exactly who Alyssa Howard truly was. Word of the incident spread rapidly through the cabin. Some of the business-class passengers muttered to each other in disbelief. Others stared intently at their phones, perhaps live tweeting or texting about the fiasco. Meanwhile, in the seat directly behind Alyssa, a well-dressed Asian man named James Chang was observing everything with quiet composure. At last, he spoke to Alyssa. "Excuse me," he began softly, leaning forward so he could speak without shouting. "Miss Howard, correct?" She nodded. "Yes. I'm James Chang," he said. "I'm an attorney for the NAACP in Los Angeles." I couldn't help but overhear everything that's happened. Her eyebrows arched with interest. "Thank you for stepping in. If you plan to..." "It's been quite the ordeal," she replied. James offered a sympathetic smile. "I do plan to step in, if that's all right with you. This is an outrageous violation of your rights as a passenger. I know you probably don't want to cause trouble, but please understand, as an attorney, I can offer some guidance. I can also be a witness if you choose to file a complaint or lawsuit." Alyssa was grateful for the support, but still hesitant. She wasn't sure if she wanted to escalate matters legally. "I appreciate that," she said, her tone sincere. "I'll keep it in mind." James gave her a business card. "Don't hesitate to call me if you need anything." What she did was racist and unprofessional, and if this airline tries to shield her, there are ways to push back. Alyssa took the card, reading it. Then she slipped it into her tote. For a moment, she considered revealing her own extraordinary connection to the airline. But she decided to wait, to handle it privately after landing. She was still reeling, her emotions a tempest inside her. Suddenly, the father in front of her, who had been part of the initial beverage service fiasco, turned around again. "I recorded some of that exchange on my phone, ma'am," he said quietly. "I don't like getting involved in people's business, but it was so blatant, I felt I had to. If you need the footage, I can send it to you." Alyssa's eyes widened. "I'd appreciate that, sir," she said, though she felt uneasy about what might happen if the video leaked publicly before she had a chance to handle it in a more controlled manner. Still, she was relieved that there was documentation of Linda's behavior. Alyssa was hardly alone. She was surrounded by supportive passengers, and ironically, that support only underscored how truly outrageous Linda's behavior had been. Alyssa could almost see Linda fuming in the galley. Carmen and Robert kept glancing in Alyssa's direction, each time offering reassuring smiles or gestures, wordlessly conveying that they would see this through in a just manner. But Linda was not done making a scene, not by a long shot. With about 2 hours left in the flight, Carmen announced that Linda would no longer be servicing the business cabin. Robert and Carmen themselves would take over. Everyone in the business class seats practically applauded the decision. A sense of relief settled over the cabin, yet tension simmered because Linda was still on the plane, and she clearly wasn't content to let things stand. From her vantage point, Alyssa could see Linda occasionally peering around the galley curtain, her eyes darting daggers in her direction. Each time, Carmen or Robert would usher Linda away. Passengers whispered their disgust. Some had begun to suspect Linda might be under the influence of some personal prejudice or vendetta that had no place in customer service, especially on a major airline like Delta. Alyssa tried again to calm herself, telling herself it was almost over. She would land, exit the plane, and set into motion all the necessary complaints. She would use every channel available to her, from the legal route to direct corporate contact. After all, she had more authority than Linda could dream of. Flashback Alyssa recalled the day she purchased her first large tranche of Delta stock. It was a gutsy move. Some might have called it reckless, given the airline was embroiled in financial woes and a slump in consumer trust. But Alyssa had done her homework. She recognized potential for recovery. Over the years, as Delta recovered and soared to new heights in the market, her investment grew exponentially. The board and top executives eventually noticed her name among the largest individual shareholders, though she had remained a quiet influence, never once stepping into the spotlight. Alyssa kept a low profile on purpose. She wanted to see how the airline operated from a regular passenger's perspective, not as a boardroom heavyweight. Today, that strategy placed her in the line of fire of a hateful employee. But it also offered her a first-hand, unfiltered look at a deep-rooted issue that she knew was not unique to Delta, but existed in many workplaces: unaddressed racism and implicit bias. Now, Linda's outburst had given her more than enough reason to blow the whistle. Alyssa felt the edges of her anger curdle into a steely resolve. This was bigger than just Linda or her offensive remarks. This was an opportunity to hold the airline accountable for how employees like Linda were trained, monitored, and disciplined. Alyssa's position meant she was not just a victim, but a potential catalyst for systemic change. With about 30 minutes left in the flight, the captain announced they would begin the final descent into Los Angeles soon. The seatbelt sign flashed on. Passengers started to pack away laptops, fasten trays, and return seat backs to their upright positions. Alyssa had just tucked her tablet into her tote when Linda suddenly appeared next to her row. Carmen, noticing Linda was in the cabin again, quickly tried to intercept, but Linda began speaking in a loud, shaking voice. Her words were addressed to Alyssa, but the entire cabin could hear every syllable. "You think you've won, huh?" Linda blurted. "You all think you're such hotshots because you whine and get everyone on your side. Well, maybe you can fool them, but I know who you really are, an entitled faker who wants to ride up here in first class where you don't belong." A chorus of protests rose from the surrounding passengers. Carmen reached for Linda's arm, hissing, "Stop it, Linda. You're making this worse for yourself." But Linda shrugged Carmen off. Her voice grew shriller, tears of anger shining in her eyes. "I've given my life to this airline," she claimed, "and people like her want to come in and demand everything, file lawsuits, act like they own the place." Alyssa stood up, outraged and trembling. Enough was enough. She had tried to remain calm, to wait until the flight landed to address the issue. But Linda's rant was the final straw. "Linda," Alyssa said in a voice that commanded the entire cabin's attention, "you have no idea who I am or what I stand for. You've discriminated against me based on my skin color, humiliated me publicly, and refused me basic courtesy throughout this entire flight. Your behavior is unacceptable, and I will be filing a formal complaint with Delta." Her words were poised, but her heart pounded. She could feel the raw emotion behind every syllable. Linda sneered, "File your complaint. See if I care. You're nobody." Robert and Carmen finally managed to pull Linda away, calling for the captain's assistance over the intercom, instructing her to remain in the galley for the remainder of the flight. Passengers were left stunned by the confrontation. Some tried to reassure Alyssa, others shook their heads in disbelief at Linda's meltdown. Alyssa carefully lowered herself back into her seat, taking measured breaths. She could almost hear her father's voice in her head from years ago, telling her to stay calm in the face of adversity, to stand tall and let the truth do the work. As the plane made its final descent into Los Angeles, an unspoken tension hung in the air. Alyssa knew this was far from over. She had to decide whether to quietly lodge her complaint or to let Linda and the airline's management know exactly how high up the chain of command she could go. The plane touched down with a gentle jolt, rolling along the runway to the gate. Passengers unbuckled their seatbelts. The pilot welcomed everyone to Los Angeles, and the overhead bins were popped open. Normally, Alyssa would have collected her things quickly and headed straight for ground transportation, eager to reach her meeting. But this time she lingered in her seat, waiting for the fiasco to continue or for the flight crew to address the situation properly. Sure enough, as soon as the door opened, 2 supervisors from the airline stepped on board. Wearing official Delta ground staff uniforms, they spoke briefly with Carmen at the front of the plane. Linda was conspicuously absent, presumably still in the galley or a crew seat. Passengers began deplaning, many glancing sympathetically at Alyssa as they passed. A few whispered short condolences or offered encouragement like, "Good luck," or "File that complaint." Alyssa appreciated their support but nodded quietly, her mind already bracing for the next steps. Once most of the passengers had exited, the airline supervisors approached Alyssa. One introduced himself as Marcus Eldridge, a station manager, and the other as Sheila Patel, a customer relations specialist. Both looked concerned and apologetic. "Miss Howard, could we speak with you briefly?" Marcus asked. "Of course," Alyssa replied. Marcus cleared his throat. "We received multiple reports of an incident during the flight. We've spoken to Carmen and Robert. We'd like to get your statement and assist you with any next steps." "We want to ensure your concerns are addressed immediately," Sheila chimed in. "We deeply regret what occurred. Please know that Delta takes these matters extremely seriously." Alyssa gazed at them for a long moment, weighing her words. She was acutely aware that she had power here both as a customer and as one of the airline's top shareholders, but she wanted to be strategic about how she used it. "I'll make a statement," Alyssa said slowly, "but not right here on the plane. I need some privacy." This was very upsetting. Marcus and Sheila exchanged a glance. "We understand," Sheila said. "We have a quiet office near the arrivals area where we can speak. Would that be acceptable?" Alyssa nodded. "Yes, that'll be fine." She gathered her tote and they escorted her off the aircraft. Carmen gave Alyssa's hand a gentle squeeze as she passed, mouthing another apology. Robert offered a respectful nod, looking relieved that someone with higher authority was stepping in. They walked through the jet bridge, weaving around other passengers. By the time they reached the arrivals corridor, Linda was nowhere to be seen. Presumably, she was being debriefed or reprimanded elsewhere. Alyssa hoped so. Someone needed to keep Linda away from unsuspecting passengers. At last, they arrived at a small side office with a Delta logo on the door. Inside, a desk, some chairs, and a potted plant greeted them. Marcus closed the door and Alyssa settled into a chair, setting her tote beside her. Sheila offered her bottled water, which Alyssa gratefully accepted. Marcus took out a notepad, ready to document everything. Sheila placed a small recording device on the desk, explaining, "We'd like to record this conversation, with your permission, to make sure we capture all the details accurately. Is that all right?" Alyssa nodded. "That's fine." Marcus began, "Miss Howard, please tell us in your own words what happened on Flight 981 today." Alyssa took a deep breath. She recounted the entire ordeal step by step, how Linda repeatedly skipped her during service, the condescending remarks, the racial overtones, the final explosion of hatred, and how Robert and Carmen attempted to mediate. She left out the part about her being a major shareholder for the moment, focusing only on the facts of the flight. As Alyssa spoke, she observed Marcus and Sheila's expressions transition from concern to disbelief, and then to grim acceptance that something very serious had taken place. Marcus scribbled notes, while Sheila occasionally interjected with clarifying questions like, "Did Linda say you people more than once? Or did any other passengers record or witness the outburst?" Once Alyssa finished, Sheila clicked off the recording device. "Miss Howard, we are so sorry. There is no excuse for what you went through," she sighed. "We will launch a formal investigation. Linda will be grounded immediately, pending that investigation. This is not a reflection of Delta's core values." Alyssa's hands trembled slightly, residual anger and anxiety still swirling inside her. Yet she remained poised. "I appreciate that Delta is taking this seriously," she said. "But I'd like to emphasize that this isn't just about me. It's about how an employee could feel so emboldened to treat a black passenger like this. There has to be accountability and changes in training or policies if necessary." Marcus closed his notepad. "Agreed. As the station manager, I can promise you that Linda will be held accountable and we will examine our policies and training. Additionally, we want to offer you compensation for this ordeal. We can discuss flight vouchers, seat upgrades, whatever will help make this right." At last, Alyssa decided the time had come to reveal her full identity. "I appreciate the gesture," she said, meeting their eyes, "but I don't want flight vouchers or anything superficial. I'm Alyssa Howard, a top 10 individual shareholder in Delta Airlines." Silence. Marcus's pen fell from his hand, and Sheila's eyes widened in shock. They exchanged swift glances, each processing the gravity of that statement. Alyssa reached into her tote and pulled out her phone. She brought up an electronic portfolio summary, revealing her substantial holdings in the airline's stock. "As you can see," she continued calmly, "I have a personal and financial interest in ensuring this airline maintains strong ethical standards and upholds its reputation. Unfortunately, Linda's behavior reflects poorly on the airline, and I won't stand for it." Sheila leaned forward, her face turning an anxious shade of pale. "Miss Howard, I had no idea," she managed. "Of course, we treat all passengers equally regardless of status or holdings, but this changes the conversation." Marcus cleared his throat nervously. "Yes, Miss Howard, please accept our sincerest apologies. We will escalate this immediately to corporate. I assure you the CEO, Ed Bastian, and the board will be informed." Alyssa allowed a moment of silence to emphasize her point. "I'm not looking for special treatment, but I am in a position to help Delta become better, and I won't hesitate to use my influence if I sense any attempt to brush this under the rug or minimize it." She let her words hang in the air. "What I need from you is a genuine commitment to address this incident and broader issues of discrimination. I also plan to personally speak to the board." Sheila, looking both relieved and rattled, nodded vigorously. "We hear you loud and clear, Miss Howard. We'll do everything necessary to rectify this and ensure it never happens again." Marcus stood, clasping his hands. "Let me get in touch with the corporate executive team right away," he said, almost stumbling over his own words. "We'd like to arrange a follow-up meeting or call, at your convenience, with some of our senior VPs. Alyssa rose from her chair, collecting her tote. "That would be wise," she said simply. "I expect to hear from them soon. For now, I have a prior engagement in Los Angeles." "You have my contact information, correct?" Sheila nodded. "Yes, from your reservation details. We'll reach out." With that, Alyssa thanked them and left the office. The door closed behind her, leaving Marcus and Sheila staring at each other, fully aware the situation had just blown wide open. Outside in the bustling arrivals terminal, Alyssa felt an odd mixture of triumph and sorrow. Triumph that Linda's bigotry would not go unanswered. Sorrow that such hatred had confronted her at all. The weight of her life experiences pressed down on her, reminding her that even if you rise to the top, racism can still find you at 30,000 feet. Over the next few days, the airline's corporate machinery roared into action. Alyssa was inundated with calls and emails from Delta executives. Ed Bastian himself, the CEO, arranged a video conference with her. He offered a profound personal apology and assured her of a thorough investigation. Linda was immediately suspended, pending further disciplinary action. In the ensuing weeks, Alyssa learned that multiple passengers had filed statements, and at least 2 had video evidence capturing Linda's vile rant. The father, who sat ahead of her, sent his footage directly to Delta's HR department. James Chang, the NAACP attorney, also followed up, confirming that a formal complaint had been recorded and that if Alyssa wanted, the NAACP was ready to support her. Alyssa appreciated the solidarity, but for now she focused on an internal resolution. Delta's board of directors, with Alyssa's input, moved swiftly to revise their diversity and sensitivity training program for all flight attendants. The story hadn't hit the mainstream media yet, which surprised Alyssa. Possibly, Delta was working overtime behind the scenes to contain the scandal. Alyssa allowed them that discretion on the condition that real change would happen. Within a month, Linda was officially terminated for gross misconduct and racial discrimination. Word reached Alyssa that Linda had tried to fight the termination, insisting she was set up, but the avalanche of evidence was undeniable. In a final ironic twist, Linda attempted to post about her alleged victimhood on social media, only to be met with an onslaught of condemnation from netizens who had seen or heard about the flight. She quickly deleted her accounts, humiliated and ostracized. Meanwhile, Alyssa continued her philanthropic and investment ventures, pushing for stronger corporate social responsibility across all her portfolio companies. She didn't seek personal revenge or relish Linda's downfall, but she did feel relief that the airline took decisive action, It stood as a testament to what could happen when one stood up for oneself and also had the resources and allies to fight back. Epilogue, sitting in her Los Angeles penthouse suite, overlooking the city's glittering lights, Alyssa reflected on the entire ordeal. She had stepped on that flight as just another passenger, trying to keep a low profile. She left it confronting the very racism she'd battled her entire life. But this time, she had the power to make real change. Linda's meltdown had been more than an isolated incident. It was a catalyst that forced the airline to look in the mirror and acknowledge that discrimination could thrive if left unchecked. And that was the silver lining: progress. With her seat at the table of the board of shareholders, Alyssa was determined to ensure that employees were better screened, better trained, and better supported in recognizing and eliminating bias. For every story that ended badly, this one ended with accountability and the promise of a more inclusive future. Alyssa Howard knew the road ahead was still long, and prejudice was not going to vanish overnight. But if Linda's fall taught the airline anything, it was that when bigotry rears its ugly head, it can and will be dismantled. After all, you never really know who you're talking to. And if you assume they're nobody, you might end up paying the price when you discover they actually hold a massive piece of the airline you so proudly claim to serve. What a turn of events, right? Our story proves one powerful truth: the way we treat others always comes back around. This flight attendant learned the hard way that prejudice has no place in our world, and especially not in a customer-facing job at 30,000 feet. Yet the real triumph is in how Alyssa stood up, refused to be a victim, and ultimately made her voice resonate at the very top of the company hierarchy. Her courage sparked a ripple effect of positive change that reached beyond a single passenger or flight route. If you found this story compelling, or it made you think twice about the power of standing up to discrimination, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel for more real-life dramas and uplifting narratives. Together, let's keep the conversation going and champion fairness and respect everywhere we go.